Hi everyone, my name's Olivia Ferris, and I'll be presenting on the socio-contextual risks for below average cognitive development in infants. So measures of cognitive development in infancy have been associated with a variety of later outcomes in the areas of language, IQ, memory, and attention. This association is particularly strong in infants with cognitive delays. So therefore, it's important to identify the risk factors contributing to below average cognitive development at this point in the lifespan so that healthcare providers can better target infants for interventions. So for my study, I had two main research questions. The first was, what specific socio-contextual factors are associated with low scores on the cognitive scale of the Bayley-3? And the Bayley is generally considered the gold standard for measuring infant cognitive development. And in our study, we classified infants with a score below 85 or one standard deviation below the mean as below average. My second research question was, does maternal sensitivity act as a buffer to risk factors for below average cognitive development? Put simply, this means, does having a more sensitive mother weaken the association between these risk factors and infant cognitive development? So the participants for our study were 85 11 to 14-month-olds and their mothers. There was a relatively even split between males and females, and we had a relatively socioeconomically and racially diverse sample. The ethnic and racial breakdown was similar to that of the general U.S. 89 mothers and infants participated in our lab visit, but 4 were excluded because they were missing scores on the Bayley. So we measured infant cognitive development using the Bayley scales of infant development, the cognitive scale. This consists of a series of developmental play tasks so socioeconomic status was measured within 5 separate domains, which included socioeconomic status, parent and infant stress, parent and infant sleep, parent well-being, and smoking. So all of these socio-contextual factors were measured using parent report, and excluding parent and infant chronologic biological stress, which was measured using hair cortisol. Maternal sensitivity was measured using the environmental availability scales, which is a global coding scheme that measures both child and parent affect. And mothers and infants participated in a 12-minute free play activity, which was later coded by trained graduate students. So we used independent sample t-tests to test the relationship between infant sleep and infant cognitive development. So as you can see here, infants with below average cognitive scores had a shorter nighttime sleep duration of 9.5 hours compared to infants with average and above scores who slept over 10 hours on average. This is important to note because the general cutoff for infant sleep duration is a nighttime sleep duration of less than 10 hours. So therefore, the infants in the below average cognitive group would actually be considered sleep deprived. So sleep is a time of infancy is a time of rapid neurodevelopment, and sleep facilitates this process. So sleep has been associated with memory, language, information processing, and the maturation of neural networks. So therefore, since these processes all occur during sleep, a sleep deprivation could negatively influence all of these processes, thus influencing infant cognitive development as a result. Also, infants did not differ by cognitive group in either nighttime wakings or in parent sleep. We also measured the association between parent anxiety and infant cognitive scores using independent sample t-tests. So parent anxiety was measured using the State Trait Anxiety Index, where higher scores indicate higher levels of anxiety. Previous research has shown a negative effect unexpectedly, infants with better cognitive scores actually had parents with higher levels of anxiety. Previous research using clinical samples has shown a negative impact of maternal anxiety disorders on infant cognitive development. However, it's important to note that anxiety levels for both groups within our sample were below the cutoff for a clinical anxiety disorder, which is a score of 40 or above on the scale. So they were within the normal range. So our findings suggest that clinical anxiety levels and mild elevations in parent anxiety might actually have very different effects on infant cognitive development, where mild elevations in anxiety might actually have a beneficial effect. So we theorize that this is due to parenting. So mothers who have higher levels of anxiety generally also display higher levels of attachment to their children. And so this might lead to beneficial parenting behaviors through higher levels of attention and commitment to the child, so therefore increasing their cognitive development. Increases in parent anxiety also are associated with increases in maternal vigilance, which could also positively influence infant cognitive development through increased attention to infant activities. Again, using independent sample t-tests, we tested the association between parent perceived social support and infant cognitive development. So again, unexpectedly, we found that infants with below average cognitive scores actually had parents with higher levels of perceived social support, which previous research has shown a positive association or a positive effect of larger social network sizes on infant cognitive development. However, our study measured only perceived social support, which may be very different than actual social network size. And so all previous studies that have shown a positive association between social support and infant cognitive development have used a measure of actual social network size. So the findings, so perceptions of social support, so if infants have below average cognitive development, this could mean that their parents need to call upon their social support networks more often because their infant is struggling or because there are other stressors putting their infants at risk for below average cognitive development. And therefore, they might perceive their level of social support as higher because they need to call upon these networks more often. So we also found no significant buffering effect by maternal sensitivity on the relationship between these identified risk factors on cognitive development. So sleep duration, parent anxiety, and parent perceived social support were all related to infant cognitive development independently of maternal sensitivity. So intervention should thus focus on targeting these risk factors themselves rather than on targeting maternal sensitivity itself. However, future research is also needed to see whether other aspects of parenting, such as vigilance or encouragement, might actually have a buffering effect on these risk factors, since these would not have been picked up by a measure of maternal sensitivity. However, there were some limitations to this study. We did not find an association between socioeconomic status, stress, or smoking and infant cognitive scores. This is likely in part due to limited variability within these factors. So there was a restricted range within some of these risks. Future studies could be useful if future studies in an entirely low SES sample could be useful because a lot of different stressors are more present within low SES individuals. So therefore, it might be easier to identify some of these risk factors. Additionally, we used a cross-sectional design for this study, which does not allow us to determine causation, nor does it allow us to detect the long-term effects of these risk factors. So we can only tell how they might affect cognitive development in infancy. Later studies are needed to determine the effects of these risk factors across the lifespan. And lastly, there's the potential that we might have had type 1 errors, which means that we detected some significant associations by chance. So this was meant to be an exploratory study where we are identifying certain risk factors for further research. So there are 4 main takeaways to this study. The first is that infant sleep matters for cognitive development, and parents should be ensuring that their infants are sleeping at least 10 hours per night. The second takeaway is that the effects of maternal anxiety disorders and mild elevations within the normal range for parents might, on infant cognitive development, may be very different. So slight elevations in parent anxiety might actually be beneficial for infant cognitive development due to their impact on parenting behavior. And third, parents with children with below average cognitive development may need to call upon their social support networks more often and therefore perceive a higher level of social support. And lastly, maternal sensitivity did not reduce the risk presented by sleep, parent anxiety, and parent perceived social support, and therefore intervention should focus on targeting these risk factors directly. I'd like to thank all of the participants of the study and Dr. Amanda Tarullo for all of her support and guidance throughout. Also, thank you to Kilojon for some additional funding for the project. Any questions? Yes.
So I'm so glad to hear that maternal anxiety. I was also thinking about the big variable of dads. How do you even figure that into a study like this?
Yeah, so we had some measures of, so primarily we only measured like mother variables like maternal anxiety, but we did have some additional questionnaires that measured fathers, but all this data was only on mothers. So I think that a future study on fathers would also be useful because it's likely that they might have different effects on cognitive development.
Are dads part of the social network that you were mentioning?
Well, yeah, they would be, but this was just measuring how, like, whether or not they felt that they had someone in need to call upon, so it didn't necessarily have to be the father. But yeah, actual social network size would measure like the support by spouse, support by friends and family separately, yeah.
Did you see any difference between male and female children?
No, so I did test the association between that, and it wasn't a covariate. Yes.
You said you had a measurement issue between perceived social support and actual social network?
Yeah.
So previous studies, how are they able to measure actual, and was the survey validated against perceived and actual?
Yeah, so first of all, yeah, we actually weren't able to collect information on actual social network size. We only measured perceived social support. And sorry, could you repeat the question?
You said the previous literature had been able to do that?
Yeah.
When you did the survey, the self-report, wasn't that self-report predicting actual?
No, so we can't tell in this sample, but usually they're pretty highly correlated, but there are differences within the two measures. To measure actual social support networks, we would have to have like an objective number of people that they interact with on a certain day-to-day basis, which takes a lot more information in general. So we sort of simplified it by doing perceived social support. So it would be useful to have that measure of actual social network size to test our theory. Yeah.
Just in regards to your first figure, did you see any trends that indicated why some children receive less sleep than others, other than just like a difference between kids?
Sorry, between what?
Just like a difference between children.
So infant sleep was correlated with a lot of other variables like socioeconomic status and parent sleep. So there are probably a lot of different things affecting their sleep in general. So, yeah.
I might have missed this, but what was the sample size?
85 mothers or 85 children and then their parents, yeah. Yeah.